already thanked DC and posted a photo of himself in the purple and gold. So as he looks ahead, we're going to do the same thing. How is it that a franchise with championship aspirations and expectations fills in the rest of the roster? As promised, our resident general manager, Ryan McDonough. Ryan, let's start there. We've got 3 future Hall of Famers on this roster and just 2 others.
Yeah, only 5 players on the roster, as you mentioned, Kristen. One of them is Alfonso McKinney. He's on a non-guaranteed contract. The other is Marc Gasol. So they need a lot in L.A. The challenge for Rob Pelinka and his staff is they don't have a lot of money. They used their biannual exception last year on Wesley Matthews, so that's not available. They do have a mid-level exception at $5.9 million, but you can really only use that on 1 player. And so the rest of the roster, I think, will have to be filled out with minimum guys and also re-signing their own free agents, Kristen. That puts extra importance on the free agency of guys like Alex Caruso and Talen Horton-Tucker. It's imperative on the Lakers to sign those guys, and they also have to hit the recruiting trail really hard with those 3 superstars trying to get the best minimum guys they can. You can sign a minimum player at any time. Most guys want to wait and see if they can get more money. The Lakers can't wait. They need to be aggressive right out of the gate in free agency.
In case you did the math on that, about $127 million owed to those 3 alone. So where is it that you find 8 or so guys that are willing to play for the league minimum and contend for a title?
I think what you have to do is go to the veteran players in their 30s who have made a lot of money and recruit them hard. You can sign minimum contracts at any time. So I'm looking at guys like Wayne Ellington and Tony Snell. I don't think they'd get above the minimum somewhere else. So if I'm LeBron, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, even Rob Pelinka, I'm calling those guys on night 1 of free agency and say, hey, commit to us. You're a rotation player for us. We have a role for you. We have a championship contender. And then with the mid-level exception, that $5.9 million, Kristen, it's really probably only 1 player. They need shooting is the theme for me. A lot of shooting went out in the deal with the Washington Wizards. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope went out in that deal, as did Kyle Kuzma. So I think that should be the theme for the Lakers, especially with a non-shooter coming back in Russell Westbrook, with LeBron James, with Anthony Davis. They need as much shooting as they can get. The challenge is, what do they do with that $5.9 million? Do they go after Patty Mills? Do they have to go after J.J. Redick or another veteran who can help them space the floor?
So you see shooting then as the biggest issue facing the Lakers then this offseason?
Shooting and depth, they're related, but they're going to need a lot of shooters. They need a lot of depth. Marc Gasol's in his mid-30s. I don't know if McKinney will be on the roster, so it's really 3 players and a blank slate, but not a lot of ways financially to do it, which is why those minimum contracts become so important. And again, I think they have to look for veterans who have made a lot and are willing to sacrifice some money elsewhere, Kristen, to play for a championship contender.
How much then would you, let's say, urge Russ to work on his shooting?
Well, I think that's going to be important, especially when you get into the playoffs. Ironically enough, in the bubble a year ago, when the Lakers played Russell Westbrook, they sagged off him. They helped off him.
Yeah.
They dared him to shoot from the perimeter. That's coming for LeBron James and Anthony Davis, especially in playoff basketball. When the game slows down, it becomes a possession-by-possession affair. So how do the Lakers deal with that? Westbrook knows it's coming, but if you look at the volume and efficiency, it's not very good. He's in his 30s now, Kristen, so I don't know how much he can improve that incrementally. I think he can, but more than anything, it's imperative on the Lakers, surround those guys with a bunch of shooters, because you know that the help is going to come off of Russ and onto LeBron and Anthony Davis.
Where would that urging tend to come from? Would it be only from someone like LeBron James?
From LeBron, from AD, I think from Frank Vogel, it needs to be emphasized from day 1 of training camp. LeBron at this stage in his career is great in any aspect of the game, but he doesn't get out and run as much in transition. We know how good Westbrook is, and that creates more driving lanes from Westbrook and LeBron on the perimeter and more room for Anthony Davis to operate in the post.
This question is by no means personal, but what are some of the tools that a GM does have when the cap space just simply isn't there?
Well, generally speaking, you look at sign and trades. The problem with that is if you receive a player back in a sign and trade, you have a hard cap at the salary cap apron of $143 million. We went over the Lakers' salaries. They're close to $130 million with just those 3 guys, so they really don't want to do that. In fact, I don't think they can afford to do that, Kristen, which is why they have to get creative with the mid-level at the $5.9 million taxpayer mid-level. Now, you can split that, but then when you split it in parts, you get closer to the minimum salary anyways for veteran players. So I think it makes more sense to use it on one guy and then, again, re-sign Caruso, re-sign Horton Tucker, and then recruit veteran free agents. Say, hey, look, we won the championship 2 years ago. If we get you in our locker room, we can win it again. Come join us, play with three future Hall of Famers, and live in Los Angeles.
We've talked a lot about how to fill out this roster, but what do you see as the single biggest primary concern for the Lakers just in these few days ahead?
Trying to get the veteran guys to commit early. Obviously, nobody wants to take the minimum, especially if the money is north of the minimum. The challenge for LA will be, can they wait? Because if they wait, then it becomes a different tier of minimum contract player. So generally speaking, Kristen, in the first couple days of free agency, guys aren't excited to take the least amount of money they can earn. But that's going to be the challenge for the Lakers, convincing veteran guys that, hey, look, sacrifice, leave some on the table. We have a role for you. We're going to win a championship. You can make a little more money in playoff bonuses if you go to the finals and win the title, but you have the platform as well. You're in LA with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and now Russell Westbrook. You're going to be on national TV, so it's going to be a recruitment pitch, I think, to some extent by Rob Pelinka and Frank Vogel, but especially the stars. You know how powerful that player-to-player recruitment is, so they're going to need LeBron, AD, and Westbrook to work the phones and try to get veterans to join them in
Isn't
LA.
that exactly how Russ ended up there? I don't know. You've mentioned a lot of names, though. Who do you expect to agree to the league minimum and to contend for a title alongside those guys?
Yeah, I think Wayne Ellington's a good fit. I also think Tony Snell, who led the league in three-point percentage last year, I think those guys are minimum contracts. Other guys I'm looking at, maybe Danny Green. Would he take less? A veteran who's won a lot of games, made a lot of money. Patty Mills, J.J. Redick, Jeff Green, guys like that. The best shooter you can get to commit for $5.9 million, who's hopefully in his early to mid-30s, has some upside and some longevity. Hopefully they're healthy. I would sign that player because, again, if you wait too long, the market moves. They don't have any financial advantage. They do have advantage with a contender, the Los Angeles market, and the storied Lakers franchise. No, yeah, by the way, they have 3 future Hall of Famers to play with, too. So they need to lean into those advantages because they're not going to be able to outspend teams in free agency.
I mean, I'd do it for half that, but get to the postseason's play-in tournament without him in the lineup this spring. The former MVP, Steph Curry, becomes eligible for a max contract extension. And when you combine his current salary with Clay, Draymond Green, and Andrew Wiggins, you're at about $139 million. The Warriors also drafted Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody in the first round amid rumors and reports that they would trade those picks. Orion, what is it that's the Warriors' plan now?
Well, it gets very expensive in the Bay for Golden State, Kristen. Their top 4 guys, the Splash Brothers, Draymond Green, and Andrew Wiggins combined make more than the luxury tax. That's for just 4 players.
Right.
So the repeater tax team, which I think makes it less likely that they're going to pay Kelly Oubre what he wants in free agency. Oubre's an unrestricted free agent, and the repeater tax gets very punitive. The higher you go into the tax, the more punitive it gets. So I expect Oubre to be on the move, and I think they're going to have to look at some of the rookies they just drafted. Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody for some productivity. They do have the taxpayer mid-level. We referenced that in the Lakers segment. That's at $5.9 million. But they're going to have a big tax bill. And for me, it comes down to what Bob Myers said. Can they stay healthy, especially Klay Thompson, who's been out the last few years, and are Joe Lacob and Peter Guber, the owners, willing to pay up? I think they will, as long as Klay's healthy.
What's available to this team in free agency?
Well, they need depth on the perimeter. One interesting name who's now available because Miami declined his team option earlier today is Andre Iguodala, who had a great run in the Bay. Iguodala is approaching his late 30s now.
The finals MVP, Andre Iguodala, right?
He sure was. Did an excellent job against LeBron James in that series. Can they bring him back on a minimum contract? And then some of the same guys we talked about with the Lakers. These teams are in similar positions. They have that $5.9 million taxpayer mid-level. They need depth, especially on the perimeter. Looking at a guy like Patty Mills. Does he want to come? Alec Burks. Who wants to come play for a contender? And it'd be very interesting to see how the free agents view those two teams. Do they think the Lakers are further ahead with LeBron and AD, or the Warriors when they get healthy? Which one is closer to championship contending? I know they both think they are, and they both have astronomical payrolls that their owners are going to have to foot the bill in order for those teams to contend.
Well, let's head elsewhere in the Western Conference, as a lot has gone on in Dallas, not the least of which concerns Rick Carlisle's exit for Indiana and former Mavs star Jason Kidd's hiring as head coach. Luka Doncic has made it clear that he's not going to comment on either until after the Olympics. But Ryan, he is the future of this franchise. Can he and Kristaps Porzingis be successful there together?
This is a very important offseason for the Dallas Mavericks because Porzingis is on a max contract with multiple years left, and Luka Doncic will be a max player next year. So they have a window this offseason to try to get another player. Another challenge, Kristen, is what to do with Tim Hardaway Jr. He's played very well in Dallas. As you know, the trade was reported as the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Well, I think Hardaway Jr. has actually outplayed Porzingis. He's an unrestricted free agent. So is there a way for the Mavs to re-sign him and get somebody else? One of the challenges is free agency hasn't even started yet, but some of the guys they were reportedly looking at, like Kyle Lowry, might be headed to Miami. They need a ball handler, in my opinion, a secondary playmaker. Is there a way for them to get creative, re-sign Hardaway Jr.? They're going to keep Willie Cauley-Stein. They picked up his team option at $4.1 million earlier today. Can they add another ball handler playmaker? I think that's what they should do. Or do they go in the front court? Do they look at some of the restricted free agents like John Collins, like Lauri Markkanen? Again, I would go with another ball handler, but maybe with Jason Kidd and Nico Harrison in the front office, they think Luka Doncic combined with Jalen Brunson is enough. I personally would look for a secondary playmaker. If it's not Kyle Lowry, is it Spencer Dinwiddie? Is it Lonzo Ball? Somebody else who can help take the offensive load off the shoulders of Luka Doncic.
Okay, a lot of talk about Luka, but is he going to be successful with Kristaps?
Well, I think he can, but he needs some help. I don't think any player in the NBA, as great as Luka Doncic or LeBron James or whoever it is, I don't think they can do it alone. Defenses are too good, especially in the playoffs. They load up. They get the ball out of that guy's hands. Jalen Brunson, to me, is a good third option, but is there a second guy? They can slot in between Luka and Brunson. I like Spencer Dinwiddie. I like Lonzo Ball, those kind of players. I think they'd help Dallas a lot. And the window's very important, Kristen, because Luka's a clear max player, and when you have Luka and Porzingis on max contracts next year, it's almost impossible to slot in a third guy. So the window is now for Dallas, and they have the cap space to be aggressive to try to add another playmaker.
Interesting. Well, in New Orleans, the Pelicans underachieved last season. They finished near the bottom of the Western Conference, winning 31 games, losing 41 of them. Knowing that Zion Williamson is this emerging star that we're going to build around, let's look at this team's roster as it's currently constructed. Zion now has missed the playoffs in his first 2 seasons. He will become eligible for an extension next summer. So what do you see, Ryan, as New Orleans' number one need this offseason?
Very similar to the Dallas Mavericks. They need a backcourt upgrade. They need a playmaker. They have 2 young perimeter players, Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart, who were restricted free agents. They're another team that was reportedly interested in Kyle Lowry, but as we sit here 19 hours before free agency, it looks like Lowry is likely to end up in Miami. So then what do teams like the Dallas Mavericks and New York Knicks, who we'll talk about here in a minute, what do they do, Kristen? Do they be aggressive going after Spencer Dinwiddie? Did they re-sign Lonzo Ball? I think that's what New Orleans has to think about. Now Zion's on his third coach in 3 years. Alvin Gentry, Stan Van Gundy, now Willie Green. Zion hasn't made the playoffs. He's eligible for an extension next year, Kristen. So this is another important offseason for a team that needs backcourt help. For me, it really hinges on Lonzo Ball. Do they want to re-sign him? If they let him go, they have a ton of money. Who do they spend it on? I personally would look at Spencer Dinwiddie. I think he'd be a good fit with with Zion and Brandon Ingram.
Would you look to try to keep Lonzo?
I mean, if you can't get Kyle Lowry, I think you have to think about it. He fits the timeline and the age better with Zion, with Ingram. All those guys are in their early to mid-20s. Bringing in Lowry would help in the short term. Mike Conley, another guy we haven't discussed, would help in the short term. But those guys are in their mid-30s. So as Zion gets good enough to win at a high level, are those guys past their prime? I like lining players up in their prime. So for me, if it's not Lonzo Ball, I like Spencer Dinwiddie a lot. He only played 3 games last year with the torn ACL. He's reportedly healthy. He's also an unrestricted free agent. So New Orleans can just go sign him on day 1 of free agency.
What is it, knowing how significantly this team would like to take that leap into next season and want to take advantage of an emerging star in Zion Williamson? What is the need that they need to address?
Well, there's some short-term needs as far as making the team more competitive, trying to make a playoff push. You mentioned in Zion's 2 seasons, they have not been in the playoffs, and they made a move around the draft to help them now. They brought in Jonas Valanciunas from Memphis, a couple guys who weren't great fits. Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe went out in that deal. So they're going for it, Kristen, but they do have a big hole in the backcourt at the point guard. Off of last year's team, Bledsoe is gone. Lonzo's a free agent. How do they address that? Do they bring Josh Hart back as well, who's a great rebounder on the wing? He can make some threes. They have a lot of needs, most of them in the backcourt. I think they feel like they're pretty good on the front line with Ingram, Zion, and now Jonas Valanciunas.
That they are. Well, free agency is soon, but lost to the Atlanta Hawks in the first round of the playoffs. Julius Randle led the team with 24 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists a game this season. The Knicks are among the teams with the most salary cap space available, and the primary need is likely that of a consistent first option at point guard. Ryan, there are point guards available in free agency. What's the Knicks strategy here?
The challenge for Leon Rose and the Knicks front office is how patient are they willing to be? There are some future Hall of Famers in this free agent market, Kristen, who we've discussed. Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Chris Paul. It doesn't look like the Knicks will be able to land any of those guys in free agency. Do they still meet with Kawhi Leonard? Chris Haynes said earlier in the show that Kawhi may take some meetings. The expectation around the league is that he re-signs in L.A. So to some extent, in a front office like the Knicks, it's a game of chicken. How long are you willing to wait? Or how quickly do you move off your primary list and move to your secondary list? On the Knicks secondary list, you're right, they need a playmaker. Again, Spencer Dinwiddie, who we just discussed, can they bring him across the river from Brooklyn? He's an unrestricted free agent. Did they want to play the offer sheet game with Lonzo Ball from New Orleans? Or does New Orleans make Lonzo unrestricted? Then they could just sign him with cap space. They need help in the backcourt. Derrick Rose is a free agent as well. So there are a lot of moving parts in New York. They have more money than anybody in the league, Kristen, but as some of these elite free agents seemingly find homes, I think they need to move on to that secondary list relatively quickly.
I'm glad you mentioned Derrick Rose because the team reportedly wants him to explore his market before offering a contract. How do you see that shaking out?
Well, they can sign him to basically any amount. They have the flexibility to do that. He played excellent basketball for the Knicks. He gave him a big lift after they acquired him from Detroit in a midseason trade. We know his history with Tom Thibodeau. He's played well for Tibbs in Chicago, Minnesota, and now New York. So I think they could add Rose, but I think his best role at this stage in his career, Kristen, is a six-man coming off the bench. I like maybe Spencer Dinwiddie as a starter. They should call about Mike Conley as well. We haven't talked about him because the expectation he's going to re-sign in Utah, but is Conley available? Is Dinwiddie available? Is Lonzo Ball available? Can they get a starter and then bring Rose off the bench in that six-man role? But Derrick Rose has other interests. The Bulls, as you know, his history with the franchise. He won an MVP there, and he's a Chicago kid. They're interested in bringing him back as well. So there is competition for Derrick Rose, who played very well last year in New York, especially in the playoffs against Atlanta.
What is it about D. Rose and Tibbs that works so well?
I think the history, the relationship, Derrick is motivated by Tom. He knows what Tom wants. He's quiet, but he's a leader in the locker room. And Tom lets him do his thing. He gives him freedom and autonomy. So it's really unusual for a player and coach to be together with three different franchises, but that's what these guys have done. You see the numbers there. The points are up. The assists are up. They've been an incredible match, and really, Derrick Rose gives Tom Thibodeau a lot of credit for helping revitalize his career. You remember in Minnesota a few years ago, people weren't sure how much gas he had left in the tank. Now here we are seasons later talking about not will Derrick Rose be in the league next year, but how much is he going to get and how many different teams are interested because he's still playing so well.
Well, elsewhere in the Eastern Conference, the Celtics are shaking things up in Boston. Brad Stevens, having stepped into the front office role previously held by Danny Ainge, Ime Udoka named head coach. So let's take a look at the C's projected depth chart. What is it that stands out to you, Ryan, in regards to, well, moves that they've already made?
The theme of the night, Kristen, point guard. What did they do at point guard? They made the deal with Kemba Walker going out to OKC. Al Horford came back in return. They made another good deal with Dallas to bring in Josh Richardson. So they have a lot of talent, but you see on their depth chart there, they don't have a traditional point guard. Marcus Smart, Josh Richardson in the backcourt, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum on the wing, and then they're good at center with Al Horford, Robert Williams. So they have a number of different options. But what do they do at the point guard spot? I think the Josh Richardson trade was not a great thing for Evan Fournier's future in Boston because their payroll is going to get expensive. So I'm looking for Fournier to be elsewhere. Is there a sign and trade that makes sense? Or do the Celtics put Marcus Smart in play in the trade market to get a more traditional free agent? There are a lot of free agents in the market, Kristen, as we've discussed, but the Celtics don't have much payroll flexibility. So Brad Stevens and his staff in Boston have to continue to get creative to figure out what they're going to do at the point guard spot.
I've talked to him as Coach Stevens for so long. What is it like, though, as the first-time guy in the front office making these kind of decisions?
It's different. There are a lot of moving parts with the Celtics, sending out a few core pieces. I mean, you think of the importance of Kemba Walker to that team over the last couple of years. Now, they brought back a familiar guy in Al Horford who played very well for the Celtics when Stevens was the coach. He'll be a key part on the court and in the locker room. But again, the point guard slot, what do they do there? And then the key for Brad Stevens, having coached players, especially younger players who he developed, is you can't get attached to those guys to the extent that you make bad decisions. You can't have blinders on. It seems like consciously he's moving away from a lot of their young players, bringing in more veterans. Horford, Richardson, we'll see what they do at the point guard position. He wants to take a step next year. They got knocked out by Brooklyn in the first round, and Brad Stevens is trying to give Ime Udoka, his new coach, more veteran tools at his disposal.
Well, a little further south, the Miami Heat finished 6th in the Eastern Conference, winning 40 games last season. They were knocked out in the first round by the eventual champions. The Heat did pick up Goran Dragic's option, but they let Andre Iguodala become a free agent. With this move now, what or who, Ryan, does Miami have in mind?
Kyle Lowry with Toronto, the reported sign and trade. It seems like the Toronto Raptors, who need a center like Precious Achiuwa, the young backup center for Miami. A lot of teams around the league like Achiuwa, Kristen. The challenge in Miami is he's backing up Bam Adebayo, who's a franchise guy down there. So it seems like the Raptors will do a sign and trade and are willing to do a sign and trade with Kyle Lowry going out and landing in Miami. Achiuwa goes back to the Raptors. Now, an important point with Goran Dragic being involved in the sign and trade, they picked up Dragic's option at $19.4 million today. He does not need to go back to Toronto, Kristen. He could go to the Raptors, but he could go to another franchise as well. There are reports tonight that teams that we've discussed, like the Dallas Mavericks and New Orleans Pelicans, who need a point guard, have some interest in Dragic. I like Dragic if I'm a team that needs a point guard. He can help you win this year, and he's on a one-year deal, so you keep your powder dry for free agency next year. So if you want to stay competitive and you have any concerns about giving some of these free agents we discussed, like Lonzo Ball, like Spencer Dinwiddie, Derrick Rose, multi-year deals, well, getting Dragic for 1 year and then keeping your flexibility for free agency next year is an appealing option as well.
Speaking of Kyle Lowry, would potentially moving Ben Simmons from Philadelphia make way for Kyle to return to his hometown?
It could. It would be a little bit complicated. I think it would have to be a sign and trade because Philly's payroll is so high with Embiid's salary, with Tobias Harris's salary. They don't have a ton of flexibility. I don't think they'd be able to create enough cap space just to sign Kyle Lowry without completely gutting their roster. So I think it would have to happen quickly. Let me put it this way, Kristen. Now we're about 18 hours away from the start of free agency. And if Philly doesn't have a deal lined up for Ben Simmons now, I think they're going to be hard-pressed to find one over the next 18 hours. You never say never, but Philly has this guy. He's young. He's in his prime. He's on a multi-year contract. They're not going to rush into a bad deal just to try to beat Miami for Kyle Lowry.
And you see that relationship as being able to be repaired despite him having to read headlines concerning his future all throughout the entirety of free agency?
Well, what I think is going to have to happen for Simmons to get moved out of Philadelphia is the asking price is going to have to come down. It's one thing to ask for a package like Houston got for James Harden. It's another to get that package for a player in Simmons who's a talented defender. He's a good playmaker. He's great in transition. He has shooting limitations. So I think if Philly's asking price comes down over the next few weeks, then maybe a deal is there to be had. If not, again, keep in mind, Daryl Morey in the Sixers front office does not have to trade this guy. He's in his mid-20s. He's on a multi-year deal. You never want to trade a player when his value is down. Based on his playoff performance and lack of shooting, Simmons' value is down, and that's the challenge for Philly's front office. And only they know, Kristen, how comfortable are they if a good deal doesn't materialize, bringing Simmons back into that locker room next year with Joel Embiid, Doc Rivers, Tobias Harris, and the team that got knocked out by Atlanta in the second round.
Well, we've got to take another break, but free agent fever continues on NBA TV as we discuss what the days ahead may hold. Stay with us.